So I cannot do it in 4.22 seconds, but I can explain how it's possible to do. So, and then with a lot of practice, you'll be able to do it. First time I think I saw a Rubik's Cube, I was maybe around 5 years old, and I couldn't figure it out. I think my parents told me that somebody set a record of 30 seconds. And I lived with that idea for quite a long time that, okay, this thing is possible. It's possible to solve it in 30 seconds. When I was 18, I saw a solved Rubik's Cube on a shelf of my friend. And I asked him, do you always just keep it like this? And he's like, no, I just can mix it up and solve it. I'm like, what? And he's like, yes, it's pretty easy. It's just a bunch of algorithms. So he wrote them on a paper, and it's just one sheet of paper. You just learn different rotations, and basically layer by layer, you put it together. So I learned it. I was practicing it for a while, and I think my best time was 2.5 minutes. And I thought, oh, well, I know people can do it in 30 seconds. Probably if I do it fast enough and long enough, I'll be able to do it. And I tried to read about more sophisticated methods, and they sounded too complicated. So I decided to stop it. It's a waste of time. Up until a couple of years ago, somehow by accident, I watched something on YouTube, and there was like 5 seconds world record. And I'm like, 5? I'm like, how is that? I can understand how is it possible to solve it in 30 seconds. How is it even possible in 5? Maybe I don't know something and I need to go and figure it out. So I read about this. It's actually pretty interesting. They use very different approach. So when you learn beginner's method, you basically look at the white piece, you make a cross, then you make corners, then you make second layer, and then you make third layer in 4 steps. There are not a lot of algorithms, so you can do it. And just rotating really, really fast, obviously you cannot do it in 5 seconds. So I started to learn it. It was a little bit mind-blowing in the beginning because it's not something that you can expect. I thought maybe there's some tricks how you rotate it faster. In reality, it's about how fast you think. The very first thing that you need to figure out when you look at the white dot and you inspect the cube, I would usually just look at it and I would find all the elements for this side. Instead, if you do speed cubing, you actually need to put it upside down. So you have yellow on top and white at the bottom. And you have to solve yellow-white cross at the bottom, not looking at it. It was a little bit mind-blowing. I'm like, okay, I don't even see it. How can I solve it? After a while, you actually realize that it's easier to do it because if element's not at the bottom, the element's somewhere else. And now you're looking somewhere else. So if you look here, you cannot see anything. If you look upside down, actually, all the pieces you need, they're somewhere at the top. So that's what makes it easy. So the first thing, you inspect the cube, and you need to figure out how to do just in 8 steps. So you need to put white cross just in 8 steps, in 8 rotations. And in professional competition, you have about 20 seconds to inspect the cube and figure this out. I'm not claiming I can still do it that fast, but I can do something. So, did I do it? Oh, I did. So, cross is there. It's pretty much same beginning as the beginner's method. The only difference now, instead of trying to put corners inside, you need to put 2 elements at the same time. So 2 layers, all the edges for the first layer and second go in at the same time. So, and there's a method called for this called first 2 layers, surprisingly. There's only like 5 ways of doing this. So pretty much 5, I would not even call it algorithms. There are barely any moves. What's interesting, it's very confusing in the beginning. After a while, you realize that it teaches you how things move around the cube. You're getting used to how there's a logic to how pieces move around, because in the beginning when you learn, it's really confusing. Things just mess up every time you move them. After L, it's called intuitive method because it teaches you intuitively understand how pieces move around the cube, and it actually helps you a lot when you practice to understand it better and better and become better in that. It's not memorization, it's just getting a concept of what is going on when you rotate cube in different directions. And what makes you faster is that when you move things, you also need to think what is next. Just moving things faster when you do this is not going to get you fast enough. You need to move it. And also at the same time, you need to see what is the next step. This is why I can talk and solve it, because I can move things and I can see how other pieces for the next pair move around, and I can immediately know how to insert it. So you practice doing two things at a time, moving it and also thinking what is next.
At the same time?
Yeah, at the same time. And the faster you can think, the faster you can solve it. So it's not about how fast you rotate, it's about how fast you can move in your head and see elements, how they move around. Right. Yeah. So, and then you go to the last layer. So in the beginner's method, you have to go through 4 steps. Obviously, it's too long. So professionals do it only in 2 steps. The first one, you need to put all yellow stickers at the top, and then it's called orientation of the last layer. And then you move pieces around in their places. It's called permutation. So there are about 100 patterns. You just look at yellow stickers, and there are about 100 different patterns of how they can be arranged. So you have to learn 100 algorithms, basically, which a lot of memorization and a lot of practice. Once you know them, you can basically solve it in just one algorithm. The trick is not just learning them, also quickly recognizing. The longer you think, okay, what is that thing, the longer it will take you to solve it. So once you, what is it? I'll put it back. So you basically have maybe like half a second to spend on it to realize what is this, and then solve it. Because if you think too long, if you think more than that, it will take you a while, and you're losing time doing this. Another reason what makes you slow is flipping cube and regrouping it. So one of the reasons you start with white at the bottom is so you don't have to flip it, because flipping takes half a second, and if you try to set 5 seconds record, it's going to take an extra half a second. Same thing with recognition. You have to recognize really fast. The faster you recognize, the faster you will solve it. Rotating. Learning how to rotate it fast is not that complicated. So, and then you go to the last layer, basically yellow stickers at the top, and now you just have some pattern, and you need to just move cubes around, preserving the yellow side. It's called permutation. There are about 20 algorithms, so it's actually easier than the previous step. So like this. So you recognize something, you recognize and solve it. Sometimes when you use beginner's method, it might take you more than 2. Sometimes it takes like 6 steps to solve the last layer. And knowing all the professional algorithms actually makes you only apply it only one algorithm. There are some more complicated situations. My favorite is this. So what happens is if you look at the side of the cube, these 2 elements, they're swapped. And there's no easy beginner's algorithm to solve it. And it involves like rotating middle layer and recognizing this kind of situations. What also makes it slow if you use beginner's method is beginner's method makes you think how to move things around. And obviously, if you look at this and try to figure out, okay, this moves here, this here, it takes too much time. The way you recognize it is by 2 things called block, 3 things, block, headlight, and opposite. So for example, if you have same colors on the side, it's called headlight. And if you have somewhere opposite colors, like orange and red next to each other, it's opposite. And if you have 2 of the same color, it's called block. So just looking at these 3 pieces, I can see here, okay, headlight, headlight, and these 2 swapped. So I can immediately recognize situation and do the algorithm. No, not this one. No.
Maximum.
That's funny. What?
So you said the last phase takes like 6 steps?
Well, if you use beginner's method, sometimes the situation like that, when piece is just swapped, there's no beginner's algorithm for swapping, but there's advanced algorithm to do this. So that, all that I told you might take you with a lot of practice to about maybe 20 seconds. So with all of that, it's only 20 seconds. So now you have to think, okay, how you go down to something like 5. So every step has their own improvements. There are more algorithms for the last layer. You can see how previous step influenced next one, and you can create better situations for those cases. When you inspect cube in the beginning, when you think about cross, you can also think, what is the first pair I'm going to insert? And if when you solve cross, you can also insert it with doing cross, it's actually even more beneficial because then you have only 3 corners to insert. So there are lots of improvements on every layer, and it gets exponentially more complicated. Plus, you need to think faster. Some people don't care about white side at all. They can do it starting with any color. It's very questionable. A lot of people don't believe it's going to make it easier. And basically, there are like 5-second records. Without that, you can always use white side and still set 5-second record, if you practice for a couple of years. Obviously, cube itself makes a difference. There are different cubes you can try. There's standard ones and speed cubes. I'll do it later. So this is speed cube. I can just rotate it with 1 finger, where standard cube you usually need whole wrist, which is too slow. There are different adjustments you can make to the cube, and there are different so-called finger tricks. Basically, what makes you fast is some unusual moves. For example, it's too slow to make 180 move, so you learn it to do with 2 fingers. And sometimes sometimes pinky involved, sometimes other fingers, because you don't want to regrip. And instead of doing rotation and then move, I can do it just with pinky. So my hand already here, I don't want to regrip, so I just use my pinky to rotate. Sometimes you rotate it, and then you want to do double move, so I would use my point finger going to be in the front. I don't want to move it in the back, so I'd use those 2. So there are a bunch of tricks. Some people use pinky to go this way. It's very weird, but sometimes their hand somewhere here, and they will use like this. A lot of weird moves. Sometimes you need to move 2 layers. What I do, I notice a lot of people don't do it, is a lot of layer rotation like this. Basically, it's like if you rotate it and rotate this layer, this is faster. It helps when you solve first 2 layers. I kind of, instead of moving top, I just move bottom, so it adjusts, so I can put elements in. I didn't see a lot of people doing it. I think it's very efficient. And sometimes you need to do absolutely the same moves with your right and left hand. Usually, I'm more right-handed. Sometimes algorithms are symmetric, so it's like same thing. And instead of learning new algorithms that are going to be right-handed, you just learn same moves with your left hand. Only in some cases, not all the time, but it's just a pretty cool thing to learn. The way you regrip, there are different options. Every algorithm sometimes have multiple options, depends what are your habits, what are your finger tricks. You can choose which one you like. Sometimes I choose based on what makes more sense and easy to remember. Sometimes it's based on how easier to rotate it.
The algorithms, I mean, how many steps are we talking here?
So if you use that's speed cube method, so you do cross, which is 1 step, and ideally you predict first pair. Then you do F to L, which is considered second step. But basically you do 4 insertions using F to L, and then you use 2 steps for the last layer. So basically there are 4 steps with some improvements you can figure out on the fly. To get my record is 17 seconds, and I was practicing 30 minutes a day for a year. So if you want faster, People who go below 15 seconds, they practice 1 hour a day every day for about 2 years. So if you want to do faster than 15 seconds, we basically talk about probably 2-hour practice every day.
Hours.
Yeah. So there's another cube. I was asked to solve it. It's actually pretty easy because if you think here are 6 colors, here are like 4, but they are shaped in a weird way. So you solve it in absolutely the same way, except for it's very confusing because because of the shapes, no colors. Once you get used to the shape, then you can pretty much solve it. Let me see. I don't know. I didn't measure how fast I can solve this one, but since I got request, let me see what I can do here.
I fixed it for you, Bert.
You fixed, how did you fix it?
I'm just kidding.
So the idea is pretty much absolutely the same. I'm gonna make this bottom. I start with the fattest. They have layers of different width. So I just start with the fattest. It kind of gives me same perception as white layer on a regular cube. And I just pretty much go from there. It's also a little weird how it rotates. So kind of things move around.
How is this one, Mark? It has like only 3 of each color.
Which one? It's called Molecube because it reminds how molecule models look like. It's much more complicated, actually. It's actually the most complicated puzzle. You need to make every side should be unique. That's the trick.
Okay.
Like you have to make every side
Okay.
unique, and it's pretty actually insane. Especially if you want to figure it out just in your mind. It's pretty, I can definitely tell it's pretty confusing. Because of no colors, you kind of have to understand, okay, what shapes, what kind of situation on the colored cube it reminds you.
That's what I was like, oh, what did I do?
Let's see. There's another one that with no triangles but squares. It shares some similarities.
Do one side.
Mike, how's your?
Mine's still broken.
You're still broken?
Yeah.
Please fix it. They're very loose. There's actually one over there that's quite loose.
That's what I remember, Mike, so I don't do. I used to get those little slide puzzles, you know, where it's like any kind of like Christmas chocolate or something back into with that, where you could like move the pieces, and I would like pop them out.
Another thing, I started. You can see some cubes they have stickers and some don't. So I actually started from stickerless cube because I did like the mechanics and how it moves. The problem is if you don't like colors, it's going to impact how fast you recognize situations. This cube that I use, it actually has 4 of about 6 stickers, actually custom. I replace standard colors because this way I can recognize them faster. For example, on the stickerless cube, yellow and green, very similar when you're sitting in bright light. So it slows you down. And standard colors on this one, I think when it's a little dark, they were quite confusing. It's a bit tricky with the last layer, but here you go. The last layer is a bit complicated, but it kind of goes into some situation that don't exist on this cube, or at least I don't know how to solve it, so I have to rotate it a couple of times to convert to something that I do know. So also the advantage of those cubes is you can rotate middle layer, and this is my favorite algorithm. And another thing that you learn to do when you do last layer, you don't need to align them. You basically have to recognize the last layer just looking at the last layer, nothing else. And then when you finish it, you can just rotate it into solved position. So it saves you. You don't need to align and think, oh, how to align it. You just need to recognize it by itself.